We've got a couple of tables of some young folks here from a couple of different schools. I can't remember what table it was, but when Justice Young and I were going around and I was doing my best to introduce him, the question came, okay, so you're on the Court of Appeals, he's on the Supreme Court, does that mean he's your boss? And I have about a minute and a half of well thought out introduction for Justice Young, and by the fact that it became about 10 seconds of an introduction, I think he answered the question, yes, he was in fact my boss. Having said that, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. He is currently a Michigan State Senator representing the 7th District of Michigan and is a candidate running for Michigan Governor. I'm proud to also say he is my state senator for the past 8 years. People out of the legislature know him to be a person who dives deep into issues before he takes a position. I'm convinced that this attention to detail that he's known for has something to do with his educational degrees being in aerospace engineering and in the private sector as an engineer for Boeing, helping to keep humans alive in space. He's a smart guy, and he is known for his attention to detail. He's also known for a sharp mind in Lansing. That's all right. So is this going to happen every time?
Yeah, I think so. I can't let Justice Young have he's got a much more esteemed career than I've got. So thank you very much. Thank you, Tom. I realize the next time Tom ever prepares any introduction, it's going to be here's Pat, here's Bob, you know. So I'm sorry about that, Tom, but Justice Young truly has a much more esteemed career here, and we're really truly thankful to have him heading up as Chief Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court for so many years. So hats off to Justice Young, please. And thank you very much for the kind introduction, Tom. I could not sit here and listen to a longer intro for just some upstart engineer here who's in an elected office nowadays. Many of you guys may not know this, but Justice Young, who actually swore me into office my first time when I ran for office, and got a special place in my heart. The first time I met him was actually at a function similar to this where I didn't know anybody from Adam. And I sat down and I didn't know who he was, and I started talking to him for about 15 minutes. And I'm sitting there, I had no idea who he was or that we had Supreme Court justices. I mean, I was pretty new to politics in the first place. And the next thing I know is I've been talking to him for 15 minutes. He's the one called up to give the keynote as Chief Justice Robert Young. And I'm going, whoa! And I just got profound appreciation for him because he's a man of character, he's a man of substance. And you want to talk about deep thinkers, he is a true deep thinker when it comes to law, and I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate him swearing me into office. Now, I was just at a forum on Saturday where there was a lot of swearing going on, but it had nothing to do with getting sworn into office. So I was the only Republican against the three leading Democratic gubernatorial candidates, and let's just say their view of the Constitution is slightly different than ours. That's why I think it's very important. The topic that I chose to talk about today is that of limited government. We talk about it all the time, but we never really get into the details on a point where we can actually go off and defend that concept to our neighbors. And that's what I'm going to attempt to go off and frame tonight. And I'm doing this as somebody who's relatively new to civics investigation. For the first 43 years of my life, I was not plugged in on politics at all. I took my civics course back in high school, and that's where it dropped, and I was never plugged in. And now I'm making up for it and paying my penance. But the idea of us as a constitutional republic never even entered my mind, and I never even gathered or took an appreciation of what that actually meant. Well, when I started considering running for office and getting more engaged politically, that changed. I mean, once how many of you guys have heard of David Barton and wall builders? All right. David Barton opened my eyes to civics and opened my eyes to the Constitution. And so a lot of stuff we're going to talk about today is based on information that I've received from him and also Rick Green out at Wall Builders, who actually delivered a Constitution class as a fundraiser. Yeah, I'm kind of so quirky and geeky that I actually have a Constitution class as a fundraiser, and we actually had people studying it. It was actually a really good class. And so what we're going to talk about today is what makes us a limited government? What elements of our Constitution actually make us, actually back up this claim that we're supposed to be a limited government? And I'm going to just touch on some of the key elements. You can go off and defend them to people when they say, yeah, we're not a limited government. After all, the Democrats like to go off and cite our preamble as the basis of our government, right? And every time I try to quote this, I start breaking into song, so please bear with me because of Schoolhouse Rock. That's the only way I can remember it all. But it's, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice well, now I have to break into the song to go off and get into the rest of it. Ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, which is usually where they stop, and promote the lessons of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, something to that effect. That's where they stop. And that makes it a open can where they can talk about anything that they want, because it's all about general welfare. So if they think it's good, to Justice Young's point, then that's something that they can go off and throw into and mix into our government. Well, that's not the way we're designed to work. We the people granted the federal government limited rights. They're captured as what they call enumerated powers in Article 1, Section 8. These are powers to set up a post office, to get post roads, to make war, to levy taxation. There's 17 of these enumerated powers, and they're captured inside of Article 1, Section 8. So when people say, what means that, what do you think, why do you think we're a limited government? You can go off and point them to that Article 1, Section 8. That's our enumerated powers. If it ain't in there, it's not something that's been allocated to our government, our federal government, to go off and enact. If you want to look at the specific powers associated with the executive branch, they can't write the executive orders that good old President Obama was writing on a regular basis. Remember his pen and a phone comment? No, actually, he's kind of constrained. Article 2, Section 2, documents the powers, the limited powers of the executive branch. And Article 3, Section 2, defines the enumerated powers of the judicial branch. Those are all limited. They're not open up for everybody to go off and consider. It's something very important for us to all go off and consider, right? We the people, the source of all our laws, all the powers that the federal government has, is actually conveyed by we the people. And they're listed and specifically listed in those sections. One of the first bills that I ever put, actually I think it was the first bill that I introduced as a senator, was to teach civics. And actually those principles right there on limited government were embedded in it. It was called Celebrate Freedom Week. And I actually talked about those key principles being put forward as something that we need to instruct our youth in. Because the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court was John Jay. And he had a famous quote that stuck with me that says that our Constitution was made, our citizens ought to diligently read and study our Constitution so that they better know what their rights are and be better able to go off and defend and assert them. We really haven't shown an appreciation for that in civics in our society for quite a while. And so for me, the civics education is extremely important, especially as somebody who kind of was asleep at the wheel for the first few decades of my life and thinking that everything was all hunky-dory. We need to go off and read and diligently study our Constitution. So it was very important for me to implement that. Now, we never got that passed into legislation, and I won't go into the details of why that happened, maybe because they substituted my bill to put out some education adequacy study. Not that I'm bitter about that or anything, but anyway, but I got it through working on the Social Studies Focus Group out with the Department of Education. And in there, we actually have these basic principles where we're teaching the principles of limited government now to our students once it gets ratified by the State Board of Ed. But we actually have some politically neutral and accurate social studies standards that are going to teach the principles of limited government for the first time in a long time. So we've got some good news to report there. All right, one of the best illustrations of this concept of limited government actually deals with one of our amendments, and it's the 18th Amendment. How many of you guys remember what the 18th Amendment is? Okay, Tom, no cheating. Paul, I know, no cheating. Tom, okay. And Tanya, I know, no cheating on that stuff. 18th Amendment is our prohibition, right? And so why did they need to pass a law to go off and prohibit commerce around alcohol? You guys ever stop to think about that? Because back at the turn of the century, or not this century, turn of the last century, they used to know that we did not grant the federal government the authority to regulate the commerce of alcohol. And they said, you know what, if we're going to give them that power, we got to pass a constitutional amendment to go off and do it. And for me, that's a remarkable amendment. When the first time somebody brought that up to me, it was like we actually understood how our government was supposed to operate back then. And so, by the way, just as a quick side note, it did take the 18th Amendment to get us this 19th Amendment because we finally sobered up and realized that women should have the vote as well, right? So, and then we appealed it and got everything back there in 21st Amendment and got back so that we could deal with President Obama's victory in 2008 and 2012 in a much better fashion. So, anyway. So the basic limited government principles are in Article 1, Section 8, Article 2, Section 2, Article 3, Section 2. Now there's a big kerfuffle around the time of ratification of the Constitution that dealt with the fact that we had George Mason and crew that said, you know, guys, it's not sufficient to go off and just say, here's the enumerated powers, because people are going to color outside of the lines of that responsibility. We need to be very clear that this is the limit of this. So they put together something called the Bill of Rights to be very clear about this. And two of the Bill of Rights amendments, the 9th Amendment and 10th Amendment, were kind of like the exclamation point saying, no, we meant it was a limited government, we gave you limited powers. 9th Amendment says that if we haven't enumerated before, essentially, that doesn't mean you're denied any other rights that are retained actually by the people. And the 10th Amendment, as we always talk about a lot, is saying any rights that are not explicitly authorized to the federal government are the rights of the states or the people and the states and the people therein. So it was kind of an exclamation point followed by another exclamation point with the 10th Amendment, and we don't really get appreciation for that. Now I'm not going to weigh in as to whether or not I thought George Mason was right or not. It's kind of a belts and suspenders legislation, if you will. We already said that you only have these powers in Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. But it's turned out that in history, we've been going back to the First Amendment, we've been going back to the Second Amendment, we've been going back to the Fourth Amendment and trying to echo it because people are coloring outside the lines of the enumerated powers consistently. So I think there was some wisdom associated with that. I'm just going to leave you with one final note. So hopefully everybody here now can defend, when they say we're limited government, you can point to the specific provisions of our Constitution that anchor the fact that we are a limited government, we're not a cornucopia. In Europe right now, they're struggling with the cornucopia approach to government. They are just listing everything out there under the sun as something that is an enumerated power, to the point where they got enumerated powers that conflict with other enumerated powers. There's an encyclopedia. I had a friend of mine that is very active in Ukraine government, and so obviously they were behind the Iron Curtain, and they did not have an appreciation of the concept of limited government. Under the Soviet system, government was everything. And now that they had their freedom, they struggled with the concept of limited freedom more than anybody else. And they had a chance of either going with the American limited government model or the European kind of socialist model that had provided a whole detailed set of rights. Well, they ended up going with the European model, but a friend of mine came over and said the reason they did that is because they don't know what freedom is. They don't know what self-governance is. And I don't want that to happen here in our state. I don't want this to happen in our country. That's why we need to go off and start promoting civics education that promotes the idea that we, the people, are the ones who are in charge. And we start acting like that. And the only way we're going to start acting like that is if we can go off and communicate it to people when they challenge us on this limited government principle. So with that being said, thank you guys very much for your attention. Thank you. Awesome job here. And by the way, hats off to Mario Fracassa here and the team of servers here that are helping us out today. This is fantastic venue. Thank you guys. God bless everyone.